All right, we're here at Zeiss with Richard, checking out some new products. Now, I recently got an A7S right when it came out. Loved the camera. There's not a ton of lenses out for it, and I mean the lenses I do have have the Zeiss label on it: the 55-1.8, the 24-70 f4. But now Zeiss is coming out with their own lineup specifically for E-mount cameras. Right. Tell us a little bit about the Batis series.
Yeah, so this is actually, I would say, a progression from the Tuit family, which is our first autofocus for APS-C format. So we had the Tuit 12mm, the 32 and the 50 macro. And they worked fine for still use when we were going after the kind of the NEX6, NEX7, Alpha 6000 side of the marketplace. But I would say that the A7 platform has really exploded into the marketplace. They've been very popular, particularly A7S for filmmakers. It's really unique in its low light capabilities. And you know, we see our job as a optical manufacturer of designing and manufacturing lenses for the popular cameras of today. Right now, this is a hot camera system. And the E-mount is a really interesting platform because it's a mirrorless system, it's small, it's light, it's kind of appealing to a lot of both still and filmmakers because of its small size, and also to women as well. We did a wedding portrait show and a number of kind of women wedding photographers that this camera appeals to. Is really quite amazing because it is a lot smaller. It's easy to sling two cameras across your neck than two big DSLRs. So we want to make sure that we had lens solutions available for these cameras coming out, and we're happy to say that we are just introducing a new line called Batis. So Zeiss is kind of naming its lens families after birds. Right. So these are Latin names for types of birds. Tuit was a type of parrot. Batis is a small bird in sub-Saharan Africa. Right? And it's really meant to describe the characteristics of the lens to some degree. So Tuit is kind of a small, colorful parrot, which kind of described the lenses. And Batis also in that keeping that it's a small, lightweight lens, but covering full frame E. And the short flange distance creates challenges for a lens company because of we have to control the ray angles. They can't be too steep because sensors like to be hit perpendicularly to the sensor. When you start to hit them at an angle, you start to get color shading in the corners. You get this kind of smearing effect where it's just not sharp and you can't correct for it. So we're designing kind of lenses from the ground up, brand new optical designs. So the 25f2 is a rather complex wide-angle design. It has two double-sided aspherics, 4 lenses with special glass. So it's a fairly exotic lens, but it's in a nice lightweight housing. We take advantage of both contrast and phase detection autofocus. So focus is very quick. The motors are silent. Responds very quickly.
So I mean, let's talk about that for a second, because in and of itself, not many Zeiss lenses have autofocus. I mean, a lot of yours are designed for manual focus shooting, right? But you know, this is probably, honestly, this is one of the things that appealed to me the most when I was considering it, is that you're not losing autofocus with this camera. Being able to trust in autofocus is kind of an important thing for these types of cameras. So you guys have included that, and I think that's a big deal for these.
It is, and we're finding that these cameras, A7S and the FS7, are also appealing to documentary shooters. You know, and when you're shooting a doc and you don't have time to focus and compose, right? You've got something's happening in front of you. You've got to be able to record it. It's got to be in focus. If it's out of focus, you know, what your footage is worthless. So these documentary shooters prefer an autofocus lens for most of what they're doing. Interviews are different, you know, where the camera's fixed and the subject is fixed. But when you're in a kind of a moving environment, a fast-moving environment, you need autofocus control. And we want to make sure that we're appealing to a broad range of applications, not just for narrative shooting, but also for documentary style. And the autofocus lenses are really critical for that side. So we'll promote these lenses for both filmmaking and also still photo shooting, and across a variety of E-mount platforms, including full frame and APS-C. The 85-1.8 does incorporate image stabilization. So the 25, we don't need it. There's a wide angle, typically you don't. But the 85-1.8 will be a nice companion lens to the 55-1.8 Zeiss lens sold by Sony. So our strategy is to introduce lenses that don't compete directly with other Zeiss brand lenses sold by Sony, but to kind of slip into the other focal lengths that aren't occupied right now.
Well, that was kind of a curious point that a lot of us had was, where's the 85mm lens? You know? And so you guys are coming out with one that is fully. So let me ask you, too, what's the difference between the 55-1.8, that's a Sony Zeiss brand, and your brand?
So there's two main things. It's who distributes it and where is it made. So they're both lenses are designed by Zeiss. So with the case of the Sony, the lens is sold through the Sony channel. It's designed in collaboration with Sony, manufactured by Sony, but to, I would say, quality standards set by Zeiss. So Sony really follows the QC kind of protocols that we have set up. So those are the two main things from an end user standpoint. Two Zeiss brands, regardless of who distributes them, are going to perform optically at the best possible for that camera system and that given focal length. 55-1.8 is a really well-regarded lens, extremely sharp, highly rated as a very good autofocus lens. So I think in time you will see a full complement of full-frame autofocus lenses for full frame, and these will also we'll sell these side by side with our Loxia lens, another bird name, but these are manual focus full-frame E-mount. So for someone who wants to take control of focus as opposed to let the camera do it, you've got full manual focus control. So it's a traditional manual focus lens with hard stops, focus scales on a lens, depth of field markings, but it communicates with the camera. So your metadata gets transferred and all of your meter functions work. So we're going to go after a couple different solutions here, for both, depending on whether or not you need manual focus or autofocus.
So how does manual focus work on a lens like this?
So it's by wire. So on the Batis lenses, like any autofocus lens, you're basically positioning, you're telling the motor where to position the focus groups on the lens, where on the Loxia series, it's a traditional manual focus lens. So we're driving the lens groups with helicoid gears that are built into the barrel. So two different systems. Now I would say that focusing off of a camera that uses electronic viewfinders is actually pretty easy to do. So between the combination of focus peaking and the magnified viewfinder, I find it to be a lot more accurate than trying to use an optical viewfinder to focus, because that optical viewfinder has to be calibrated perfectly, with a sensor plane. And if it's not, it could look and focus through the viewfinder, but it could look out of focus when you finally get the images, and you don't know it until you actually examine the file. So when you're focusing off the sensor, it's WYSIWYG, and if it looks in focus, you're in focus.
Now, is there going to be variable speed on the manual focus? So the faster you move it, the faster it moves, or is it kind of a one-to-one?
Yeah, it's. I'm not aware. It's a good question. I'm not aware that there's a variable speed on the lens. I think it's just one speed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me ask you about that too. Is there a stop measurement in that? What's the equivalent to for what the IS would compensate for? Because like sometimes they'll say like 2 or 3 stop IS that you can slow down the shutter and it would still compensate for that.
Right. Another good question. I don't have an answer for it.
Okay.
Be perfectly honest with you. 2 stops, I would say, at least. 3, I'm not sure about, but that's something we'd have to look into. The other feature we have on the lens which is rather unique, is an OLED display on the barrel of the lens. And this display shows both focus distance in feet or meters, but also the depth of field markings. So the one thing that's absent with a lot of autofocus lenses is that there's no focus scale, there's no depth of field markings. And for someone who needs that information, we now can provide it via this OLED display. So you can preset this on the lens that you either have feet or meters, and it can either be set to on or off, and that's a control through the lens itself.
So these are just been announced.
Yeah.
When can we see these on store shelves?
So we'll start shipping mid-July. So about 6 weeks from now.
And do we have pricing announced for each of them?
Yeah, the 25 is actually the more expensive lens. List price $12.99, and the 85-1.4 is at $11.99.
Still a great price for people that want something like that. I mean, that's in line with the 55-1.8 right now.
Exactly.
So yeah, I'm sure I'll be picking one up when it comes out.
Great.
Awesome. Thanks for
Thanks to our sponsors for making our Cine Gear coverage possible.